Istanbul. Interesting subject now. Have you ever been bored at work? Of course you have. But try suing your company. That's what one Frenchman is doing. Frédéric Desardes says his employer, Interparfum, forced him to quit by making his job redundant. Desardes says he felt bored and ashamed of being paid for nothing, and that led him to depression. He's now suing the company for $400,000 in damages. Our editor-at-large is in Paris, where this is all happening, Craig Copetas. Craig, this seems an incredible lawsuit, really. There's so many people bored at work, they would never dream of doing this. What's happening?
Well, I'm bored with you, Matthew. Can I sue you for
So sue me.
$200,000? Look, we could let the jokes fly here, but what's happening is there's an existential crisis in the country that invented existentialism. This lawsuit is reflective of the lunacy of French law, which we've been reporting on, employment law, for the past year. And even more importantly, why Anglo companies don't want to invest in France. Because although you may think this lawsuit is completely frivolous, the French don't. It falls into a category called moral harassment, and it involves a new disease called placardisation, which means putting someone in the cupboard. And this guy, Desardes, said that this has caused him to even have epileptic seizures that could have led to his death. Now, whether or not he wins this lawsuit is unimportant if you're an employer. There's an old saying in law, Matthew, you can beat the rap, but you can't beat the ride. The employer here is putting out tens of thousands of dollars to defend himself in this lawsuit. It's lunacy.
Craig, he calls it a descent into hell, which sounds pretty dramatic. He says it was similar to a burnout, but less interesting. He calls it, in the English, a bore-out. Apparently, 30% of French workers feel this way. Why do people stick to these unrewarding jobs?
Because there's no other jobs here in France. Again, this points to the feckless nature of the Hollande government, now at a low. His popularity is now below 11%. You know, we have many statistics that we call upon here all the time in Money Talks, Matthew. You and I, every day, we discuss them. But I'm going to give you one that really puts all of this in context. Half of all young French adults would leave the country because their future looks so miserable, because they have no opportunity. Now, that's 24 million people in a country of 66 million people. That's a pretty darn shocking statistic. Now, as far as Desardes goes, he says what this situation has created. He went further than what you described, Matthew. In the court documents, he referred to himself as a, quote, professional zombie, unquote. Now, what corporation, big or small in their right mind, would have to spend time, money, and lawyers on dealing with a case like this?
Craig Copetas, thank you very much for that update from Paris. Well, joining me now from London is the business writer, David Bolchover. David, thanks for joining us on Money Talks. We just heard our editor-at-large talking about how he was turned into a zombie, in his words. Now, you wrote the book, The Living Dead. I think that's pretty much sums it up.
That's right. Well, that was based on my own experience of working for very prestigious companies for a number of years, not doing very much for most of that time. And so I thought it would be very interesting to research this issue in more depth, and the results that I found were shocking, really.
You were telling me earlier that everyone is complaining about being stressed and overworked, but actually the opposite is far more prevalent.
Yeah, well, you know, at the end of a day's work, what are you going to tell your friends? Are you going to tell them that I'm stressed out and I'm important and I'm busy all day? Or are you going to tell them that I got up in the morning, went to work and did nothing? And what are you going to tell your boss at work and your colleagues? Are you going to tell them you're so busy and you're so indispensable to the company? Or are you going to tell them that you've been doing nothing for the last few months or years?
Right. I think we've all experienced that at some point in our careers. What is the cure then? If people are going into work now, what should they be looking for in a company to make sure they're motivated and they get noticed at work?
Well, for the individual, you know, if you really want to avoid doing nothing at work and being totally bored, I would avoid working for large companies. Obviously, there are people who are very busy in large companies and some people who are moderately busy, but the most waste is in large companies. So if you want to avoid that eventuality, I would work for a very small company. The waste, obviously, in small companies is minimal. They operate in a very competitive environment. And if you are doing nothing, it'll be spotted very, very quickly.
Exactly, which is why I've always worked in big companies. David Bolchover, thank you very much.